In this segment, I want to talk to you about the kinds of messages that were sent when the Chinese transmitted their written language to other countries. And understand that even inside of what is today China, the process was like this for a whole host of people that are today regarded as Chinese, but were once barbarians living on the edge of the civilized Chinese culture. Eventually, the Chinese culture took in 200 different dialects, and some of the dialects were virtually different languages. They were all unified, though, because they were all a single written language, which was a decision made by the first emperor who unified all of China, a man named Qin Shi Huangdi, who ruled briefly from about 220 BCE to about 207 BCE in the Qin dynasty. His brief dynasty did a number of things, unified the length of wheel axles so that roads were uniform, started the Great Wall, started the Grand Canal, built an enormous tomb for himself. But among the things he did was send out a decree that henceforth all Chinese would follow one set of written characters, unifying all of the different dialects under a single language. And by doing so, he ended up creating a vehicle on which Confucianism, as the core Chinese traditional doctrine, spread around the globe. One of the examples that I've discussed already is the example of the character Ren. Character Ren, a simple stick figure, still in use in China today, is the character for man. Except, of course, it's more than man. It's humankind. Human kindness, it is benevolence, and it is filial piety, it is harmony. Each one of those words I just used has its own separate character, and each of those separate characters have their own connotations that are spread around the globe. Once you start spreading the Chinese written language, you end up spreading Chinese cultural concepts as well. So, the Koreans, the Japanese, countries that were not conquered by the Chinese but were assimilated culturally through the language, took the Chinese characters, even when it didn't fit particularly well with their oral language, and shoehorned their oral language into the written language and took in a whole host of Confucian cultural ideas. Now, it's not absolutely unique. To this day, in the West, we try to spread our cultural ideas through the use of language. So, English words like democracy, words like free speech, words like human rights are our words, all of them embedded with a whole host of concepts that we seek to send around the globe. But the Chinese, I think, were among the earliest and most successful in sending their culture abroad. Their culture involves a series of ideas, and I'm going to try to arrange them logically here. The first concept that you really need to address when you look at Confucianism is the concept of Luan. Luan is social disorder. It is any kind of disorder that causes tranquility and harmony to depart. Of course, a war or a civil war or a rebellion would be examples of Luan. For the Chinese, Luan is represented by war, which may be war with other countries, or it may be civil war within a country, or it may simply be rebellions. It may be fistfights on a street corner. It is social disorder. But it's more than that. It suggests that the physical act of violence, violent fighting between different human beings, is only going to occur if some kind of disagreement in ideas have already occurred. So for the Chinese, Luan starts when people start being disagreeable to one another, when they are not pleasant to one another, when they cause another person to lose face. That's an idea you've heard about. The Chinese are sensitive to losing face. Well, they're not sensitive to losing face just for the sake of face. They are worried about losing face because of the very real prospect that war or social disorder will break out as a result of the verbal disagreement. Luan is the great enemy. So how do you get around Luan? How do you prevent Luan from developing? How do you promote its opposite, which would be something like harmony? Well, you promote harmony by promoting benevolence. You promote harmony by promoting Ren. You promote harmony by promoting filial piety, which is the family relationships that are meant to nurture a single unified family. All of these things blend together, and they create a whole host of concepts. For me to use the word benevolence, an English word, to try to cover the character is to miss a whole host of connotations that the Chinese character would include. To talk about filial piety is to talk about a whole system of rules and rituals that govern how people are supposed to behave within families. The single character doesn't do it. But if you were trying to teach that single character to someone in a different culture, you would have to go through the sets of rules so that they fully understand what filial piety meant. In this way, the Chinese culture spreads. Now, let me try to work on what some of those things mean. One of the key features of filial piety is an appropriate relationship within the hierarchies of a family. It's not too difficult for me to explain to you the notion of authority within the family. The notion that, for example, the father might be the head of the family. We even had, not too many decades ago on American television, a program, Father Knows Best, which clearly had a patriarchal message. We don't show that, by the way, series anymore because it seems to go against the sense of equality between the sexes. But it was not that long ago that that concept fit. So starting with an idea of a hierarchy within the family, I want to extend it the way Chinese culture does extend it. Chinese culture starts with that notion and builds on it in a variety of ways. The father is the head of the family. That means that he's superior to his wife, the woman within the family. By analogy, the argument is that men are superior to women in a hierarchical way. Now, we're not talking Thomas Jefferson here, and we're certainly not talking Gloria Steinem, but we're talking about the way in which the Chinese saw the relation between genders within a family. On top of that, the father was superior to all of his children. The notion of the authority of the father in the family extends to the authority of older children over younger children. That's something that's familiar in the human context in America. But it's made explicit in the Confucian system, so that the older brother has authority over the younger brother. And that hierarchy continues for a lifetime. Since it's based on birth order, specifically, it doesn't change. Extending beyond the family, the Confucian hierarchy extends to the father of the nation, or, for most of the Confucian history, the emperor. So the emperor is the father for the country, and all of his ministers are like his children, and by implication, all of the subjects in the realm are like his children. And then, finally, we deal with what happens when males go outside their home. What do they do with their friends and with their neighbors? Well, it's even then, despite the implied equality of two men who are separately in charge of their families, there actually is a hierarchy based on seniority. The older person has seniority over the younger person. When I was in China, my boss, the director of the department in which I worked, was a few days older than I was. Although we were essentially the same age, he was Lao Gong, Old Gong, and our Xiao Wei, young Wilson. And this kind of hierarchy transcended actually the organizational hierarchy, which had me as one of the teachers within a program of which he was the head. Even outside of the university, he would have been Lao Gong, and I would have been Xiao Wei. This hierarchy then extends throughout the society. And Confucian culture, Confucian promotion of harmony, is based on the notion that there is a hierarchy. There is a kind of, although it's not Western and doesn't fit very well with Thomas Jefferson's all men are created equal, there is some sense in which that can be appropriate. If you have a society that claims everything is equal, when people know it's not, I'm not equally good at basketball with Michael Jordan. I'm not equally good at playing the piano with Van Cliburn. I'm not equally good in a whole host of ways with other people in other characteristics. Saying that people are equal may lead to competitions as why they try to show their superiority despite their equal birth order. Hierarchy says, no. We're going to establish that hierarchies exist and that if everybody knows their place, a certain kind of harmony will be promoted. Right away, in the Western way of thinking, this is not a good idea. The notion should be to promote equality. But before you treat it as an utterly authoritarian system, you need to know the rest of the Chinese story. The rest of the Chinese story is bound up in the notion of benevolence. What does benevolence mean? Well, it means that people within the hierarchy have got to show a certain benevolence to one another. So you may have a higher prestige based on your hierarchical position, but you're responsible for those below you. So the father has authority within the family, but his responsibility is at all times to show that he can take care of the family. The father may have authority over the wife, the husband may have authority over the wife, but he has the responsibility to take care of her. The older brother may have authority over the younger brother, but he also has the responsibility to take care of the younger brother. Just in a simplest story from my own experience in China. When I was in China in 1989, an event called the Tiananmen Incident occurred. A series of demonstrations went on for 7 weeks, and then the army cracked down on those who demonstrated. One of my students, who was not heavily involved in the demonstrations and therefore should not have been picked up or would not have been picked up by the police, nonetheless went to jail for 444 days. He went to jail because his younger brother had participated. And when the police came to the family, he volunteered to go in his younger brother's place by claiming that he was involved in the demonstrations when he had not been. He was showing his authority over the younger brother, but he was also showing his responsibility for the younger brother. Presumably, if he had been very careful, he would have told his younger brother not to participate, would have kept him out of trouble, and because he didn't do that part of his job well, it was his responsibility to go to jail in place of his younger brother. In this sense, then, the hierarchy should not be seen as an inhumane system. It may seem out of step with Western thinking about equality, but it is not an inhumane system. The necessity of reciprocity will always be the moderating factor. And all of these things are flowing logically out of a few simple characters. A simple character like Ren incorporates all of these other ideas. And as you go to explain the different characters, you begin to transmit a cultural understanding across great distances, as the Chinese have. More can be said about Chinese culture, and more will be said in other segments.